You had no authority. None. Mexico City. What were you doing there?
I was taking some overdue home.
Hello, welcome to my world of stuff. It's time for the final countdown to Bond before No Time to Die. Let's pitch up at 2015. Let's meet Spectre. Hello, welcome back. So here we are. As I said, it's the very last of my countdown to Bond videos. No Time to Die is just a few hours away from me now. I'm recording this on Wednesday morning, about 11:30. Quite hyped for the thought of seeing No Time to Die. The reviews have been brilliant, very positive, very upbeat. And I think I'm going to get more out of it now, having revisited the Daniel Craig Bond films, because I'm now familiar with the backstory and the arcs and the characters and so on. I think if I'd gone to see it without having watched any of them for years, I'd have been reaching into my memory to try and remember a lot of the events of the previous films, but now they're all fresh in my mind. So I'm really pleased I've done that. I think I'll get more out of it by revisiting all the films. However, that's not the point of a film. The point of a film is to go in and enjoy it for what it is. You shouldn't necessarily need to know the backstory of previous films, but I think if you do, you get a bit more out of it. Anyway, that's No Time to Die, which I'm going to be reviewing tomorrow morning. Today, a quick look at Spectre, which is the most recent Bond film. And when I say recent, I mean 2015. Of course, various delays, pandemic-related and otherwise, have prevented No Time to Die getting to us sooner. But it seemed to take quite a long time. It started filming mid-2019. So I think there was a 3-4 year gap before they got the next one going, which is weird because the Bond franchise was on a bit of a roll with two hugely successful Daniel Craig films in Skyfall and Spectre. So it's odd that they waited a while before getting back on the boat, if you like. But of course, I think there were issues with getting Daniel Craig back on board because he was notoriously reluctant to do so. You'll probably remember how when Spectre came out, I think at one particular press conference or interview, he's quoted as saying he'd rather slash his wrist than do another Bond film. But we now know, because I've seen a couple of documentaries recently, that he had a lot of injuries during the making of Spectre. And I can imagine that having just wrapped on the film, the thought of going back into that hell of production wasn't something he relished. However, going to Spectre itself, 2015, directed again by Sam Mendes, who's back from his huge success with Skyfall. And again, it sort of takes up the story a little bit later after the events of Skyfall. Bond is back in action again. We discovered that he's seen a secret video which M left him, Judi Dench of course making a final cameo appearance. She was warning him about a certain agent that he needed to keep tabs on. So the film starts off in Mexico, the Day of the Dead festival, where Bond is pursuing a terrorist character. Again, it's another thrilling pre-credits title sequence. It's not up to the standard of Skyfall, which is this big, long, extended fight scene and the chase on the train and so on. But this is, quite a powerful, packed scene, in Mexico with hundreds of extras during the Day of the Dead festival. Bond having his huge fight in a helicopter, which is thrillingly done. And then he sort of drifts over the horizon on the helicopter. We discover the plot of the film basically is that MI6 and MI5 are being combined. It's been decided that the MI6 program with the 007 agents is a little bit old-fashioned and perhaps the security services should be working in a more discreet way. The plan to put the two together is being fashioned by a character who becomes known as C, which of course leads to various amusing jokes about what C means. He's played by Andrew Scott, who was at the time sort of flavour of the month thanks to his appearances in Sherlock. And Bond eventually embarks on an adventure which features lots of elements from previous films. The Return of Mr. White, for example. There's references to his previous adventures. And we eventually discover that the whole plan to combine the security services has been masterminded with the help of C, with a mysterious character who turns out to be, this is not a spoiler, well, it is a spoiler if you haven't seen the film, but come on, it's 6 years ago. It's Bond's old adversary, Ernst Stavro Blofeld. Now, of course, I'm not going to go to the chronology of Bond and how Bond's storylines work, because I don't think you can do that, because Bond knows Blofeld of old in the history of Bond. But if we take the view, as I think we must, that Daniel Craig's Bond is a complete reboot and a completely new version of the character, like a reinvention, a reinterpretation, if you like. This is the first time he's met Blofeld, and it's great to see that this figure that we know in the past from Bond, previous versions of Bond, is now in this version, and he's played with the usual subtle, chilling charm and menace by Christoph Waltz, who's, he brings that urbane, slightly otherworldly charm to the character. And eventually, without going through the machinations of the plot, there's lots of the usual fights. Dave Bautista appears as Mr. Hinks, who's this mute assassin who pursues Bond everywhere he goes. And there are a number of exciting fight sequences. A couple of the issues I had with some of the action scenes, though, although they're well directed, there's a certain clinical Spartanness to them. Now, there's a car chase, I think it's around Rome, with Bond's new car. And it's quite amusing because he can't get the gadgets to work. He's trying to activate the machine guns and so on. And music comes on and that sort of stuff. And the gun is armed and stuff like that, which is quite amusing. And there's a little play on those Bond tropes. But the trouble is he's having this chase on the streets of Rome, but the streets are completely deserted. Now, obviously, practically speaking, this was filmed in the middle of the night. But you don't get any sense that this is an inhabited city. There's no other cars, there's no other people. And it's not a very exciting chase, to be honest. It's sort of cars running around streets. And then I noticed particularly in the fight with Mr. Hinks and Bond on the train, he's enjoying a very pleasant meal with Madeline Swan, who's played with real grace by Leah Seydoux, who, of course, is back in No Time to Die. And they're in this packed restaurant car. Hinks appears, and suddenly the car's empty. There's nobody there. And they fight through several carriages of the train. There's nobody around. And I know that for practical production purposes, it's probably easier to choreograph a big fight scene without lots of extras lurking in the background. But it takes the reality away. And those two particular scenes jumped out at me. I thought, oh, that's taking me out a little bit because this train is now deserted. Little things like that do tend to bother me slightly. Ultimately, this film does lean in towards Bond tropes again, because it turns out that Stavro Blofeld has his headquarters in a crater. I suppose it's a nod to You Only Live Twice, really. It's a meteor crater out in the desert where there are lots of guards, and Bond and Madeline Swan are captured and Bond is tortured. It's a nod towards all that sort of stuff, but it doesn't come alive very well. As I say, Waltz is a great villain. He's very threatening, very menacing. But there's something missing in those final scenes. Bond basically escapes too easily. He manages to thwart Waltz, confuses him, sets off an explosion, and then sets off another explosion, shoots a few guards, and he and Madeline escape, and the place blows up. It doesn't have any of the rush of the classic, I suppose, is You Only Live Twice, the volcano attack, with all the ninjas attacking the volcano and Bond leading the assault against Blofeld's army. This is a nod towards that, but it has none of the scale or scope. That the base itself it looks like a model from a Doctor Who story in the 70s, and it just blows up. And then it leads to this sort of strange coda, because obviously Blofeld escaped, and he attacks Bond again in the new MI6 headquarters, which is this new tower which is being built in London. The old MI5 headquarters, as it actually is in London, is demolished, which is a bit strange because it's actually still there. And there's a bit of a battle that ensues there. Madeline Swan is kidnapped. And it's a lot of the usual countdowns and explosions and things. But it seems like a sort of a coda too far, if you like. I think it might have been better if the film had ended with the explosion destroying the base, flat as that was. And I do wonder if perhaps they realised that that wasn't a really spectacular ending. So they brought it back to London, and they brought it back to Bond's base, if you like. That's where Bond works out of. and it's where his adventures often start. And there's, it's quite a spectacular scene with the helicopter that crashes on Westminster Bridge, but it seems a little bit, it just doesn't have the lift. It doesn't have the punch, if you like, that Skyfall and Casino Royale and even Quantum of Solace, if I'm honest, had. It seems a bit anticlimactic. And there is a sense at the end of the film that this is where Daniel Craig's era was supposed to end. There's quite a nice little thing, of course, which I'd forgotten about, because I was just saying to my brother earlier in the week, because I know the deep Aston Martin is back in the new film. I thought, well, they're going to have to work hard to reconstruct that, because it was destroyed in Skyfall. But of course, that's a sort of a thread of this film, that the car is being rebuilt. And at the end of the film, Bond is now apparently in love with Madeline Swan, and they drive off into the sunset together in the DB5, and that sort of draws a line, I suppose, under Craig's story. And I think it does in a way, because it ties up all the previous films, because it turns out that Blofeld was manipulating all Bond's three previous adventures, if you like. All the villains were sort of put into place by him, and it's quite a nice idea. And it does sort of think, well, that's sort of the end of it, and Bond's gone off now. When he comes back, he'll be played by somebody else and it'll start again. But that's not the case, because obviously things are kicking off in the next film. I did enjoy it. I did felt the pace was a bit off. It did drag in places. It didn't completely hold my attention in the way that all the previous three films did, to be honest. Some of the action scenes, as I say, felt a little bit perfunctory, a little bit going through the motions. And that issue of these deserted places did niggle at me slightly. The deserted Rome, the deserted train, just stuck out at me. I felt it just lacked a certain energy. Now, whether it was Sam Mendes felt he'd done his bit in Skyfall and was being asked to do it again and couldn't quite manage it, if you like. He couldn't quite rise to the occasion to create a bigger Bond. I think he tried to do something more in line with classic Bond, but it didn't quite come off. So I'm hoping that he will, the new film, which of course is directed by Kari Fukunaga, will give us that big explosive return to the Bond values. And it certainly sounds from the early reviews as if it's a hell of a thrill ride. But that's to come. So that's Spectre, which I enjoyed, but I didn't love in the way that I've loved some of the previous films. But I will give it a 7 out of 10, because it's a good, solid film. I think all Daniel Craig's films have been good. That's the point I do want to make. I think it's been a hell of a ride. And rewatching them for this feature has not only built up my anticipation for the new film, but it's really made me appreciate what he brought to Bond and what Barbara Broccoli was bringing to Bond and what she wanted to do with the character in bringing him into the real world and the modern age, but still feeling like Bond. I often felt that Daniel Craig's Bond was a bit too generic in a way. He was a bit too Jason Bourne, he was a bit too Ethan Hunt, he was a bit too much in that spy mould of those sort of action stars we get these days. But there is something more to Bond, even in these circumstances. He's still a bit more than those characters because of the weight of the myth, I suppose. Anyway, that's enough of me rattling on. Hope you've enjoyed this little series, Countdown to Bond. Leave a comment down below with any views on the Bond films. Particularly, I would love to hear what you think of No Time to Die when you see it. So there'll be a video up tomorrow on that one. Like and subscribe, please, if you can. I'm still getting a few extra subscribers here and there, but quite a few views, and that doesn't really correlate. So if you can, press the subscribe button. You don't have to watch the videos when they come up, but it'll just be nice to have the subscribe, and it was creeping up a little bit. Anyway, that's me done. I'll be back tomorrow with No Time to Die. Until then, hey, you know what they say. You keep kicking the stuff.